Welcome to the Hopkinton Zoning Advisory Committee meeting of February 22nd, 2021. I'm going to start with the open meeting, remote meeting script, and then we'll do a roll call and get started. Good evening. This open meeting of the Hopkinton Zoning Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we are complying with the executive order that suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as the public body makes provisions through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable access to the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Zoning Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via Zoom app, as posted in the town's web meeting calendar, and the committee's agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting is broadcast on HCAM TV. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. So I'm going to go through a roll call, I'm sorry, not a vote, just a roll call. So just acknowledge when I call your name. Ron?
Present.
Curtis?
Present.
Ted?
Barker Hook is present.
Ria?
Here.
Rachel?
Present.
Sundar?
Sundar present.
Madhu?
Present.
And Mary Larson Marlowe is present. Have I missed any members of the ZAC? Okay. Great. So
Is John Catino here?
I have not seen him on. I just went through the list. I didn't see it. Okay. So this evening, our goal is to finalize what we want to present to the planning board as our recommendation for a tree clearing or tree protection bylaw. We are going to leave it to the planning board to determine whether or not this is more appropriately a zoning bylaw or a general bylaw. We're not going to discuss that here tonight. John Gelsich, as well as Elaine, did a lot of rewrites. So Elaine reviewed this as well. But John did a great deal of rewrites and has done a wonderful job of cleaning it up and making it reflect what we have discussed in many previous meetings as our intent. But there's obviously still several different issues that we need to come to a conclusion on. And then our goal would be to vote on this at the end of the meeting in order to send it or not send it to the planning board. I wanted to start with the concept of Basal Area, and I'm hoping you all reviewed the article and any other things that you wanted to refer to. I certainly did a lot of reading on forestry and got educated beyond what I've ever been before. But I would appreciate, John, if you could give us an overview of what Basal Area is and how we're going to be using it here.
Sure. So Basal Area, and I'm not going to repeat the definition that's on your screen right now, but it's basically the area of all of the trunks that are on a certain plot of land, and it's the aggregate. So if you were to say, there's 1,000 square feet of basal area, that would be a lot of trees in a certain area, and they usually do it per acre. The reason I included basal area in this rather than trees per acre or just acres cleared or percentage of a lot cleared is because I think this really gets at the trees that we're trying to protect through this bylaw and not the land itself. So given one scenario, if if you read the bylaw, you see the limitations to a percentage of the basal area can be cut, or a maximum percentage of the basal area can be cut. So in residential areas, you can cut 20% of the basal area. And what that means is not necessarily 20% of the trees, because you can make the 20% of basal area work with different diameters of trees and different areas of trees. So if you wanted to cut a lot of the trees, but leave some of the bigger ones, you could theoretically cut only 20%, leaving what we think of as specimen trees, because that would take a significant portion of the basal area of the tree stand out of the calculation, because you're essentially cutting smaller trunk trees, which allows for flexibility on the developer's part and preservation of trees that we want to keep, productive trees, and even potentially, if it's done right, a good design for homes or developments where they're preserving trees that are in the for lack of a better word, the tree stand that they're cutting. They're leaving larger trees while still meeting what their needs are by cutting the trees to put buildings or roads or whatever, but still meeting the maximum basal area percentage by preserving the larger trees, which may make up a significant portion of the basal area. So without visuals, it's kind of hard to describe, but I think there were some good visuals in that article I sent over to the ZAC members. And if there's any members of the public who would like that article, I can forward it to them as well. They can just email me. But I think it allows for some flexibility on the developer's part to either clear, a section of the woodlot for trees, or selectively choose which trees to clear in order to meet their needs. So I think it may work out, hopefully, in my head, theoretically, it works out the best.
And I just wanted to point out that the way that we have it defined in the writing of the article right now is that only trees greater than 3 inches in diameter, DBH, are even factored into this equation. So anything under 3 inches would be able to be cut without affecting this at all. Okay. And of course, we have the opportunity to change that 3 inches, but I think that was a good choice by John. Any questions on basal area?
Yes, through the chair.
Yes.
So for a given plot of land, who is responsible for calculating the basal area? Is that the owner of that land, or is that an enforcement authority of the town?
The article specifies that the application would have to be based on a certified individual, so a certified arborist or a licensed landscape architect, in order to determine this. Now, there are certainly, and as you probably saw in the article and any other articles you read, there are many ways to estimate the basal area of coverage of an acre without measuring every tree. So there are ways to do it that are acceptable within the industry, and any of these certified professionals would likely be able to do that and likely know all about that. But there's also, that information for any homeowner or developer or anyone else. There's the information on the web that they would be able to use to estimate before getting a professional involved in an application.
So through the chair, just to follow up. So in other words, this would not be considered an onerous requirement by the applicant, would it?
Opinions on that? Anyone else?
Okay.
Go ahead. Anyone?
So applicants think everything is too much.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ted.
No, well, I think I was going to say, just because it seemed like there was silence to Sundar's question, I think I agree with Curtis. A developer could think anything is too onerous. What I like about this is we are looking to protect trees from large-scale clearing regardless of the reason. But our particular frustration has been with solar farms. It seems to me that the Basal area does what we want with limiting solar development, because it would be very difficult for a solar developer to leave the big trees, right? I mean, those are the trees that are most problematic. Whereas some of the other developments we've seen, which we think have been done more responsibly, they have much greater flexibility in how they do things and are saving the most valuable trees. I'm kind of repeating John, but I want to tie it into what our original intent was, which is a complement to our solar screening law to go at our question of commercial solar development in town. I think this works really nicely with our solar development concerns.
I agree, Mary. This seems to be a really good choice of figuring out how to deal with this. I just have one question, and maybe it was answered before. How do we get to 3 inches? What is that? Is that a standard that's commonly used on the size of the trees as a benchmark?
John, I have an opinion on this, but did you have any specific area that you got this from?
Yeah, so we pulled it from the Scenic Road bylaw.
Okay.
3 inches is basically what we consider trees that need to be reviewed for that type of thing. So it's keeping consistent with other tree focused bylaws we have in town.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. And then the other question I had is, where did the 70% for business and industrial come from as a benchmark for the Basal area?
That is something that we are going to be getting to in a little while, and it's
Okay,
up
all
for
right,
discussion.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's quite all right.
Last time, and I'm just trying to understand, like, are these numbers like, sort of a standard, in general, or is it we're just picking it out of the sky and saying this should work, which happens too.
Yeah.
But
So
thanks. I'll wait.
So to a certain extent, it was a ballpark, but it was after some discussion. That was, yeah. So anyhow, we will get to that in much more detail.
Through the chair.
Yes, go ahead, Ted.
This may also come up later when we get to those percentages. My one question about Basal area is, we're talking about measuring a tree as it exists when you cut it down, the aggregate. If we are allowing, and maybe this comes up in our later discussion, if we're allowing cutting beyond those 70, 20, 20, if those are our final numbers, if you replant, how does that work with Basal area? After all, if you cut down, when you replant, it's very, very small trees. However, 5 years later, they're bigger trees. And so that might add a complication later on if there's flexibility to go beyond our percentages and replant to get back to them. The Basal area may create a little bit of difficulty.
That's a
because
good point.
New planting versus mature tree.
That's a good point. So my reading of it, when I was reading through this, is that it would be interpreted, if written as is, that it would be the size of the tree when you plant it. But we might want to change that. We might want to say, the assumed size of the tree at the age of 5 years, or something along those lines, which, so that's something to consider when we get there.
I certainly don't have an opinion on it yet. It just popped into my head now.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that. Good point. Anyone else?
I did want to ask, I'm sorry, what does DBH stand for?
Diameter at breast height. So
Okay.
4.5 feet from the ground.
Got it. Thank you. Maybe we should just put that in the glossary along with the rest of the terminology.
It is.
It's there? Oh, okay, sorry. Sorry.
I asked this same question when I read this earlier, and I was, wait a second, it's already here. So,
Okay.
Okay. So this is conceptual more than anything. So anyone who isn't automatically exempt from this article, anyone would be able to remove dead or diseased trees. So those don't count at all. And then they would need to estimate the DBH or the basal area, I'm sorry, by one of many methods for estimating such a thing. And then for the official application for tree cutting, they would need to have somebody registered and certified in this type of work to do the estimate. But at least for, the initial estimate of understanding where they're at and how many things they could cut, they would be able to do that on their own. And then it's only trees 3 inches or greater. And as John had pointed out earlier, this takes into account, this basal area formula takes into account the larger trees are more contribution, more valuable toward the basal area of square foot per acre. So maintaining the larger trees is going to be automatically beneficial to whomever wants to develop the land. And that's going to be automatically beneficial in this application process, maintaining larger trees. So it is definitely getting where we want it to go in terms of maintaining larger trees as much as possible, as long as they're healthy. All right.
Mary,
Go ahead.
it may be inconsequential. What you just said was 3 inches or greater. What is written is greater than 3 inches.
Yeah, we should
Does it really
definitely
matter?
make sure. We should definitely make sure that we have that consistent in all places.
I'm going to guess that John took the language from the Scenic Road trees, but we ought to make sure that we're consistent.
Absolutely. Okay. So my thought was we would go through the definitions and the exemptions and then get to those percentages, because the percentages really are the meat of this in terms of, things that we might need to make decisions and adjust and so on. Does that sound reasonable to everyone? And then once we've made changes or adjustments in any of those areas, then we can go back to the beginning and reread the entire article before we make decisions. Okay?
Yes.
Ron, you said you had some general comments. Do you want to deal with them in each section as we come to them, or are they more general that you want to speak to them now?
I'll thank you, Mary. One of them is that this falls under the category of unintended consequences. And this proposed bylaw could be a disincentive to use the open space landscape preservation provision in our zoning code, which, that has resulted in over a 1 square mile of tree covered permanent open space in Hopkinton. But land which could be set aside for open space under the OSLP may now be required to meet the lot clearing ratio requirements. So we may end up with less open space in the future than what the OSLP is designed to do. So again, I think it's something that I would like to enter into the discussion, and then we'll go to the percent. I'll get back to the percentages later, but that was an unintended consequence.
John actually added OSLPD to the exemptions in this writing of this. So they would be categorically exempted from this application. So that is, if we indeed leave that exemption in, because we did talk about OSLPDs last time, and they are absolutely doing the right things right now, the way they develop the land. So it is currently an exemption. If we choose not to have it exempt, the applicability might need to be clarified, because I would view this as the open space designation of land within the OSLPD, that would not count against them. That would be part of the original application. It would be able to count as their aggregate, total basal area. And it would not count against them because, then it's the application is happening prior to the time when the land is turned over to the town for open space. That is the way I would interpret it, just in reading through this. Now, again, if they aren't exempt, we would need to clarify that, I think.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's start with the definitions then. Basal area, I think we've covered. So basically it is reported in square feet per acre. This is something that we might, I don't know if this is done typically, John, but we might want to footnote it and cite that article so that it's relatively easy for people to find more information on it. Okay. Certified arborist, I'm not going to read through that whole thing. It's basically somebody certified to judge your trees. Okay. Cutting or removal of trees. The removal of one or more trees, trimming of major branches measuring 5 inches in diameter, 6 inches from the tree trunk. I found that a little bit, I know what it means, but I found it a little bit confusing just because it becomes a really long sentence. But I don't know if it's necessary to change it really. Opinions on that?
I agree. It should be 2 sentences.
Okay. So this measuring this part is defining the branches. And so if we can separate that out in some way.
Can we just say this to eliminate, I think the comma between branches and measuring creates.
I know.
What if it's
Or
trimming of branches measuring 5 inches in diameter?
Yeah. That does.
Or we can even say 6 inches in length, right?
What?
Isn't it 6 inches in length from the tree trunk? No?
It's measured 6 inches from the trunk and the branch is 5 inches in diameter, and then it qualifies as major. That's what it means.
I just don't know if we need to call it a major branch. Just say trimming of branches measuring 5 inches in diameter. To me, that clears up the only bit of confusion I bumped into reading it.
Through the chair, if I could just clarify these, the way that I've got it listed, it's basically that definition or the one below it. And I failed to put a comment in on that one. It was in one of my original drafts. It's basically either or on these definitions of cutting or removal of trees or cutting or clearing of trees. Additionally, now that I'm looking at it, this is something that was pulled from the Scenic Road bylaw, and I don't know if it pertains to what we're trying to do here, because cutting branches on trees won't be captured in Basal area.
Right. I agree that it won't be, and it's not necessarily applicable. Also, on the Scenic Road bylaw, it's actually kind of confusing there too. And we've run into that at planning board, that it's like, okay, wait a minute, what does this refer to? So we may have to just double check that we don't use the word removal of trees elsewhere in the bylaw. So if we're using this definition, cutting or clearing of trees, we may just need to make sure later in the bylaw we don't use removal.
Well, John, you were saying it's one or the other of those paragraphs we need to keep and one needs to go.
Right.
I would think the cutting or clearing of trees is probably pertains a little bit more to what we're talking about.
I would tend to agree. Everyone okay with that?
I agree.
Yep.
Yeah, it covers it more things.
Yeah. Okay, so removal or causing to be removed through direct or indirect actions, trees measuring 3 inches DBH or greater. Actions considered to be clearing shall include, but are not limited to, removal of healthy trees, topping of trees, causing irreversible damage to roots or trunks, destroying the structural integrity of vegetation, and/or any filling, excavation, grading, or trenching in the root area of a tree which has the potential to cause irreversible damage. So we've covered almost every loophole.
Can we change root area to essential root zone, which we have defined?
This one says 3 inches or greater. Our basal
Yeah.
area was greater than 3 inches.
I know. So 3 inches or greater.
I
Greater
like 3
than
inches or greater. I like grabbing that extra millimeter for us.
Yeah, we might as well.
3 inches or greater. Where else do we have this?
Well, isn't this supposed to match the scenic road definition?
It doesn't have to.
But wouldn't it be better if it did?
It would.
I'm just wondering, I don't know how it's written in the scenic, but you guys just answered the question about why we were looking at 3 inches. So I'm just wondering, maybe wouldn't that be being consistent, gives it a little more heft?
Opinions.
Does anyone have the scenic road bylaw handy at their fingertips?
I can pull it up.
Dawn.
Sausage?
Pretty sure he cut and pasted and it was greater than 3 inches.
Yeah, but then I'm wondering if the tree clearing was also cut and pasted.
No.
These
that
weren't
was
all
one
cut
I
and
read.
pasted. They were cut and reformulated.
Ah, okay. So,
I'll check the
okay.
scenic road.
While he's checking that, we'll move on. Drip line, an area encircling the base of a tree which is delineated by a vertical line extending from the outer limits of a tree's branch tips to the ground. Diameter at breast height, DBH, is the measurement of the diameter of a tree stem outside the bark taken 4.5 feet above the ground on the uphill side of the tree. Essential root zone, area on the ground between the trunk and 10 feet beyond the drip line of a tree, which is required for protection of a tree's root system. Did you find it, John?
Yes, so it is in the trees are defined as 3 inches or more.
3 inches or greater. Okay. And so I've changed this one to 3 inches or greater as well. We'll just keep an eye on it elsewhere in the article to make sure we don't use different terms. Okay.
Was there some verbiage in some of the others regarding the diameter at breast height having to do with multiple trunk trees?
There is a mention down here.
Okay.
Specimen tree.
Okay, that's right. Okay.
Okay. Hazardous tree, a tree that is dead, has a structural defect or disease, is infected with pests. I'm just trying to get parallel here. Is infected, which impedes safe sight distance or traffic flow, or otherwise poses a threat to life or property as determined by a tree warden or certified arborist. Do we have to say or the landscape architect too? So, or tree professional, John?
I would leave it as that because
Didn't we
I think the tree
define?
warden is going to want to weigh in no matter what on that.
Okay, fair enough.
I have a punctuation language thing.
Go ahead.
I believe the way it's written right now, it suggests that the pests would impede safe sight distance. Not,
You're right.
so I believe you
But there's
get rid of the
two
comma and turn which into that. And then I
I
think
like that better. I don't like witches.
that you don't want the comma.
No comma.
I don't think so. But you might have
Infected with pests. No,
tree
but we don't
that
want
is
it.
structural or is infected with pests that impedes.
Yeah, but we don't want it. That infected with pests that impede
I
safe.
don't know, right? I think that if we change the problem is the comma which. Comma which means we are
Referring back to
talking
that. Yeah.
specifically about.
Yeah, it's a clause referring back. Yeah. Mhm.
You can just call it is infected. You don't need the word with pests if that's causing the confusion. Infected in any way is okay, right?
That's true.
That's probably true. Although is infected and infested the same thing? Does a pest cause infection? Does a termite cause infection?
Disease or pest infestation.
I think that was supposed to say infested, and it may have been a typo.
How about that?
And then I still think you don't want the comma after pests.
I actually was trying to say that this is what would be better, or infestation. Tree that is dead.
I'm sorry. Through the chair, I think the comma was meant because it was all of the conditions. A tree that is dead is one condition, has a structural defect, disease or infestation that impedes safe sight or flow. That's why there was a comma. I think so. I don't think
we could do semicolons. How do people feel about semicolons? Some people hate them.
I think it separates out the pieces of the sentence. It's either that or make
because it's such a long sentence, or otherwise poses a threat to life or property.
One more after structural defect.
Where?
Oh boy.
Oh yeah, I didn't even see that. Thank you. Oh wait, it's structural defect, disease, or infestation. I guess would it? I thought it was a structural defect, disease, or infestation. That was a phrase.
I think it can have a structural defect and not be diseased or infested. So
Yeah, those are two separate things. But then we would have to say has a.
Through the chair, I think we also then have to delete that second that. Because if you're reading it, it's a tree that is dead, that has a structural defect, and that impedes safe sight distance or traffic flow.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay. I think I've got too many spaces there. Okay, let's see here. A tree that is dead, semi, has a structural defect, semi, has a disease or pest infestation. I made a new word. Semi. Impedes safe sight distance or traffic flow, semi, or otherwise poses a threat to life or property. Now this part.
You have an extra I and an extra comma.
Okay.
The infected with pests, the I wasn't deleted and the comma after that wasn't deleted.
So this phrase seems to refer only to the very last item.
get rid of the comma.
would it be just easy to just make it a bullet or something? So
Legal counsel tends to put these to lists like this. I don't know why exactly, but that seems to be the wording that they prefer.
Mary, I like the rewriting, but I don't like the semicolon anymore. Generally, semicolons are if within each item you also have commas. Like if you said, I want 3 sandwiches, ham and cheese, semicolon, bacon, comma, lettuce, comma, and tomato, semicolon,
Yeah.
peanut butter and jelly. That's when the semicolons come in. Because
Well, we did originally have a list there, structural defect.
Right. But then it was the which that threw things off.
Yeah, I know.
Now that we've cleaned all of that up, I think that commas are much better than semicolons in this new sentence. Because we don't have those other commas before which.
Right.
And that comma right there is fine. That doesn't confuse.
Okay.
There's still a semicolon after defect.
All right.
I had a general comment that kind of is brought up here. Do we define who the tree warden is at some point? I didn't find that.
Curtis, we're looking for a volunteer.
The tree warden is a position in town.
Yeah.
Okay.
DPW director is currently the interim tree warden or acting tree warden.
Does that need to be mentioned in this? Or is it just understood? Okay.
Okay. Registered landscape architect is fairly straightforward. Specimen tree, a native species tree with a DBH, or in the case of a multi-stem tree, a combined DBH of 18 inches or larger. Trees that have a small height at maturity or are slow growing, such as flowering dogwood or American holly with DBH of 4 inches or larger, shall also be considered specimen trees. No tree that fits the definition of hazardous tree shall be considered a specimen tree. I don't know if we want to include the dogwood or American holly. Just throwing that out there, that second sentence.
Through the chair.
Yeah.
If we are indeed making basil with almost the fulcrum around which this bylaw is going to live, do we still need any reference to specimen tree?
Yes. Specimen trees are used later. You'll see where that it's used. And then if we end up cutting it out, then we won't need the definition.
Okay.
Okay.
So to help answer your question about the dogwood or holly, can we zip down to where it's used so that we can see how it's being applied?
Sure. It's in here someplace. Hang on. Okay, well, it's here. Limited pre-development work related only to creating temporary site access and digging test pits, provided this work avoids the essential root zone of specimen trees. There's another space. There's another spot. I could have sworn there was another spot.
That's okay. You can do a Control F and search for it.
Yeah. Okay, reasonable effort shall be demonstrated in the development plan for the preservation of specimen trees, existing stands of trees, trees at the site perimeter, and forested area that is contiguous with vegetation, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the two places that it's used.
So going back through the chair, going back to that last section that you spoke about, I think my question still stands in that case. So if the applicant is being told basal width is your main factor, then in essence, does D stand above it? Meaning, are we saying beyond that, also make sure? I mean, is this in addition to the basal width factor?
Yes.
Okay.
In addition, because the review standards, include the basal area in A, but all of these other ones are also true.
Okay. I'm just curious if there's going to be pushback from. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So when we get there, if we decide to delete any of those, then we can delete the definition.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. Any input on whether or not this is deleted?
So here's my input. I think we got that because we saw it in some other towns' bylaws.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know enough about trees. I couldn't even tell you what an American holly looks like. I don't know if it's the bush that I can't stand outside my door. That sure doesn't tree anyway. I worry about that being there because we've happened to pick two trees that we saw on another bylaw. I love dogwoods. I'd love to save dogwoods. It seems like kind of arbitrary, such as, I don't know what that means really because I don't know enough about trees.
Yeah, such as.
I like the specimen tree. I like protecting those in the way that they're listed down below. I'm leaning, as much as I'd like to protect dogwoods and probably hollies, I'm leaning away from that middle section because I don't know enough about trees to defend it.
I'm with you there.
Well, I think you could add another tree. You could add in a Japanese maple. You could add in a flowering cherry. I mean, these are all trees that are slow growing trees that are specimen trees. They're specially grown and placed in places you just don't want to cut them down unless you're Washington, right? But no, seriously, the person who's going to be reading this is typically going to be that expert that the owner has to hire in order to determine what's on the property and what is part of the basal area.
So you're in favor of leaving it, but perhaps listing a few more.
Add another one in, add a Japanese maple in too. It's because I think it gives more, those two are just two, but you know, you give it more flavor. It could be add a Japanese maple or a flowering cherry tree or something like that. It's meant to, you know, give people an idea that these were especially, you know, planted trees at one point, you know?
So here's my ignorance. Is a Japanese maple a native species, or is it imported from maybe Japan?
Well, it was many trees that we know today as specimen trees were all imported from Japan, and
They all came from Japan.
right? I mean, that's a fact. It's just but so it's not about importation. It's just about, you know, is it a special tree? So I would add something in to clarify it, or, you know, I mean, come up with some language that says, well, you know, these trees that, you know, people pay a lot of money to put there. You know?
Through the chair.
Yes, Ron.
Mary, the word "such as" gives the planning board a lot of flexibility to, it doesn't say these specific trees, but slow growing trees, so that the more specific we get, we run the risk of excluding other trees that what we wanted to be included in that. So I think it's good just to give a couple of examples and let it go.
And leave it in.
Yeah, I found a Google search says a slow growth rate means the plant usually grows 12 inches or less each year. Medium growers add 13 to 24 inches each year, and fast growing trees grow 25 inches or more per year. So I think maybe with the specifying slow growing, and as Ron said, with just a few examples of what we're kind of looking at, I don't know if we want to get that specific or just leave the slow growing.
Slow growing 12 inches or less per year. Is that what you read?
Yeah, I'm just not sure we want to specify that. Maybe just keep the slow growing, and such as, like Ron said, does not limit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Doesn't limit us to those two trees. It's just a slow growing tree that if the arborist says it's slow growing, then 4 inches applies.
Gary Trendle, could you identify yourself and your address and then give your comment?
Hi, Gary Trendle, 31 Chamberlain Street. Just a comment to Ted's question. I do know that I've seen quite a few Japanese maples growing naturally in the woods, so I don't know if they are native or not. But on that note, I'm wondering if maybe a specimen tree should not be defined as a native species. And I'm wondering if that might be a little bit more clear for people.
It previously had naturalized in here, John, which I assume would be those trees that were imported but have now naturalized to this this area, and that is not, another addition we could potentially make.
Through the chair, yeah. Japanese maples, I think, are considered naturalized trees.
Mhm.
I think the point of having native or naturalized, I guess now we want to add it, is to avoid the invasive species.
Right, and that makes sense.
The Japanese maple apparently reached Britain in 1820. Give or take another 50 years, it probably reached America by 1850 or 1870. So that makes it fairly grandfathered.
Okay, so we will leave this in here. We can decide whether or not we use the slow growing definition or not, but let's move on, okay? Subject site, the parcel or combination of parcels that make up an area of proposed development or tree clearing activities. Tree clearing permit, a permit issued by the planning board pursuant to this article that authorizes clearing activities in the town of Hopkinton. Trees includes any tree, the trunk of which has a diameter of 3 inches or more. We said or greater before. I'll just keep it consistent. As measured 4.5 feet above the ground, DBH. And understory vegetation, small trees, saplings, shrubs, and ground cover plants growing beneath and shaded by the canopy of trees. Any comments on any of those? Okay. Applicability. No person shall undertake tree clearing activities which result in the removal of an aggregate basal area greater than the maximum total basal area as set forth in this article on a subject site larger than 1 acre without first obtaining a tree clearing permit from the planning board unless specifically exempted under this article. Okay.
Humanities teacher would like to change which to that.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
Why are we talking about 1 acre?
I wondered why that came in here too, and whether or not, what the general feel is for it. It basically would exempt anything in any district under 1 acre.
Lakefront property or lakefront district is all under 1 acre.
Right.
Still important that those trees are there.
But it's residential and exempted.
The
Yeah.
residential is exempted anyhow, yeah. This basically would exempt the business and commercial and agricultural under 1 acre if any of those exist. So
why would it not, why is agriculture pulled out versus residential?
agriculture is a separate zone.
Right, but what I'm saying is we have houses in a lot of agricultural zones, so I'm just wondering, like.
I know, but we still have to treat it as a separate zone, and agriculture. Okay, so when we get to the exemptions, we'll see that. But again, I don't know if we want to exempt everything under 1 acre in addition to the other exemptions we have. So I'm just asking for a show of hands on, would you like the larger than 1 acre in here or not in here?
No.
Not in here. Whatever is there should be in exemptions, in my opinion.
Okay. Curtis?
I say we take the 1 acre out. We have other exemptions to cover.
Okay, Ted?
I agree. Eliminate it.
And Ron?
I would like to leave it in. Our intent in this article is to really focus on large-scale commercial solar developments, and this is exempting the smaller ones from additional requirements. So I would just soon leave it in.
Okay, Madhu?
I don't mind. I think we can take it out because mostly everything else can be covered by the exemptions. So people may not come to see the applicability to see what is exempt. Even if we want to mention this larger than 1 acre thing, it should be in the exemptions. Anything smaller than 1 acre should be exempted.
Okay, I agree that I'd rather have it in the exemptions than in the applicability, just for clarity's sake.
Correct.
If we put it in at all. Rachel, do you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, so I agree with the group to put it in an exemption. I also had a question about the use of the term person at the beginning. Does that mean that a company that owns land can do it? Does that mean a lessee can do? It doesn't apply. I wasn't really sure why it says person there.
John? Should we use another term?
So, I mean, unless the woods are going to be cleared by robots, a person is going to have to undertake clearing. And most of our bylaws refer to a person doing whatever the bylaw is talking about. So it's consistent in that regard. I mean, we could say no person, organization, agency, or company to, make it all inclusive, if that would make everyone feel more comfortable.
I'm comfortable leaving this to you and legal counsel in terms of what is appropriate in the bylaws.
I agree. I would trust John and legal counsel on wording there.
Yep, same here.
So we will take up the acre issue when we get to, okay, we're going to skip over procedure for obtaining permits and we're going to go to exemptions. So we can, if we wish, add the acreage. So exemptions, tree clearing permits shall not be required. Clearing of trees on individual building lots containing an existing single-family or two-family residential dwelling, or on individual lots for the purpose of constructing a single-family or two-family residential dwelling. Clearing of trees with the intent to construct single or two-family dwellings within a subdivision approved by the planning board pursuant to the subdivision control law are not exempt from the provisions of this article, with the exception of subdivisions, except those which are exempt. So the more we do that, it gets really confusing. And so that's why, I think that maybe even putting the OSLPD as a separate item again might be better for clarity's sake. Just my thought. That's just a wording thought. In terms of the meaning behind this one, we discussed this extensively last time. We're talking about residential, but we don't include subdivisions because we wanted to make it very clear that even though they're only building on one lot at a time and it's a single family or two family residential dwelling, that's not the point of this article exemption. The idea is only to exempt the individual homeowners. Okay.
So through the chair, just the highlighted comment there, that was a question/comment from Elaine.
Mhm.
And she mentioned multifamilies, condos. There are several of those around town. And is the intent to exclude those from this exemption? So changing it to residential and not single family or two family would include those, and then leaving it as single family or two family would exclude those.
My concern was that if we put in multifamily or we, include multifamily, how many multiples of a family are we talking about? And then does it exempt apartment buildings or large scale condos? And to me, that wasn't our intent. At least that's not my understanding of our intent. Thoughts on that?
I think I'm with you, Mary. I think our intent was my family owns this plot of land and we'd like to build a house for ourselves or our kids on it. And we don't want the tree bylaw to get in the way. And I do think that's different from building a commercial home where you're saying, I'd like to be a landlord on this plot of land and have a 4-family, 5-family, 6-family, who knows. I think the intent is for single or two-family residential dwellings to allow those families to use their land as they best see fit for those things, those houses.
Anyone else?
I still don't agree with, I'm sorry, Sundar, I still don't agree with allowing people to clear cut their property without some idea of how it's going to affect the hydrology on neighboring properties. I mentioned this before.
I know you did. And during our discussion last week, we did come to this conclusion that we did want to exempt residential properties of this sort, of just a single family, dual family, two family residential dwellings.
Okay.
But the stormwater management is still an issue that would be a factor. And So,
But you wouldn't be able to fix it out once it's already done. That's the problem. Is there's I watched many people in this town clear cut their trees and then wait until they decided it was a good time to start construction, because by cutting the trees, you're affecting the hydrology, you're affecting any potential wetland but botany on the site. And if you wait for a couple of years, there won't be a wetland there. You know what I mean? So it's really an interesting, and these are the tricks of the trade. I'm just telling you this because I work with a lot of developers. So it's an interesting, phenomenon. But I mean, if you guys have already decided on it, you've decided on it. I'm just here for noise.
any other thoughts? Sundar, did you have something?
No, I was good with what you and Ted had suggested.
Okay. Is everyone okay with that particular deletion right there?
Yep, but I do expect that this will come up in the town meeting, and we may just have to defend that, the reasoning behind why we chose to go ahead with this language versus just calling it residential.
Okay.
A general question, does the proximity to the lake have any effect on what people can do with their property?
I think I can answer that, Curtis.
Wouldn't come into play.
Proximity to the lake puts people squarely within Conservation Commission discussions.
And that includes single-family homes?
Everything. Anything within a 100-foot buffer of wetlands or lake is absolutely Conservation Commission discussions.
Okay, and you have control over tree removal.
There's a lot of talk about tree removal in Conservation Commission meetings.
Okay, so maybe these people cutting all their trees around the lake are in violation of Concom regulations.
Well, I think I know Ria's road, and if you are on the upland side from the lake, you might be further than 100 feet from the lake. So then you're not Conservation Commission.
Exactly. But I have witnessed a lot of trees removed from the water side as well. And there's nobody really reviewing this or doing it. I mean, I literally, when I first got here, I went to conservation because I had a big tree that, was a big tree, but it was leaning against the house. I mean, it was, and so I did get permission to take that tree down. But I have witnessed a lot of trees that, are just being randomly knocked away, pulled out, full roots pulled out, not just cutting it. So it's a big problem.
I would like to say that I do believe we should look into this, but I don't believe that it should be part of this particular bylaw. I think we need to look at strengthening perhaps the conservation and wetlands bylaws.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I commit to doing that as soon as we are done with this one. Okay. Is everyone happy with this particular, other than Ria, everyone happy with this particular exemption?
Through the chair,
Mary, I
please.
understand what you're saying about an exemption within an exemption within an exemption,
Mhm.
but honestly, I don't think that's too difficult to follow.
Okay.
So I think it's probably, there must be a reason John put it that way. And again, I will trust him. I can see what's going on there.
Okay. I'm fine with that, absolutely. Okay. So keeping in mind that single-family and two-family residential dwellings, the lots for those are exempt from this bylaw. Do you feel that the 1 acre restriction should be also exempt? And that would of course cover every other zoning district. So business, industrial, agricultural, anything other than a single family home. As I recall, it was Madhu and Ron in particular that thought it should be there.
I was more worried about the placement, but I'm trying to think what could be the possible scenarios where something within 1 acre could be used for business. I'm trying to imagine the cases that would fit in there. If we put that exemption, who will use it? Of course, I can't immediately think of answers. That's why I was like, if it is useful, we put it in. If it's not going to be useful, then there is no point, right? So
I'm thinking in a business zoned area, a lot of less than 1 acre on which a business is putting in a building, say a veterinary office or something like that.
I have a perfect example.
Okay, go ahead.
The mobile station was scheduled to be expanded. We reviewed a bunch of things for that to be expanded, but there was a contract with a dealer on site and it didn't go through. That has trees on it, the expanded area. So that would be less than 1 acre and it is a commercial area. So just use that as an example of how you want to work this bylaw.
Even the Dunkin' Donuts on Main Street would probably qualify to be under 1 acre, right?
Yep, probably.
yeah, see that's the thing. Are we making it hard for small businesses like that to come into Hopkinton, or is that what?
No, but I thought by putting that as an exemption, we are making it easy, right? Because we're telling them you'll be exempt, right? If you have.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking the other way around. Like if we don't put it, what happens?
Oh yeah, okay,
Like,
okay.
That's the I can't decide. Of course, I wouldn't want them to take off the trees. That's not the point of it. But are we making it harder for small businesses to come in then?
Yes.
And so, yes, and I think that Ron is making the point of we really don't, our intent was never to make it hard for small businesses. We were trying to make large developments have to be responsible about their tree removal. Not a small business on a small lot in a business district, something like that.
Yeah. So if I'm leaning more towards actually having it as an exemption, but I'm trying to justify it to myself. How would I justify that? Like, is there something that would stop me from doing that? That's what I'm trying to think actually.
And I'll play devil's advocate here. One of the reasons that we removed a lot of the acreage specific types of wording in this bylaw, earlier drafts, is because how do we justify 1 acre? How do we justify that it isn't 2 acres or 1.5 acres or 1/2 acre? So I'm not saying that we're going to have to sit there defending every little number, but there's that too.
Yeah. Again, I still vote to keep it in the exemptions. I will go with whatever is the majority vote. Personally, I would like to see it there, but.
Okay, so I'm going to have to take a straw poll on whether or not we include it in the bylaw that we vote on or not. So including 1 acre lots as an exemption. Yes or no? Rhea?
Yes.
Curtis?
No.
Ted?
I've been swayed to yes.
And Ron?
Yes.
Ted?
I think I already voted. I've been swayed to yes.
Oh, Ted, I'm sorry. Sundar?
I got 2 votes. That's a lot of power I have in this committee.
I'm a yes for the exemption.
Yes for the exemption. And Madhu, did I ask you yet?
Yes for the exemption.
I don't think you asked Rachel.
Rachel, no, I don't think they should be exempted.
Okay, so we've got 5-2. I'm a yes. That makes it 6 because I was also swayed. 1 acre.
I think there is possibly the question you raised, why 1 acre, why not 2? But I think it's almost impossible to avoid those questions.
What's
After all, we're about to say 20, 20, 70 or something else.
Subject site.
But I like 1 acre. That doesn't seem too big to me.
Most of our commercial land is already built on.
Yes.
So it's not like a big difference. It's when you're taking raw land and you're all of a sudden saying, well, we're going to make this commercial, and that's when you get into a bunch of issues. I think the last wooded commercial lot, Paul Mastriani is going to be doing the storage on South Street, and the industrial building there, and that would come underneath this because obviously it's 10 acres of land. But
so there's also the theoretical situation of more area gets rezoned as business or something like that. So, okay.
You see that happening?
No, but I'm just saying theoretically. Who knows what'll happen in 30 years? Okay, so on to the rest of the exemptions. Removal of hazardous trees. Routine maintenance of, I'm sorry, I've got to move this. Okay, there we go. Routine maintenance of vegetation and removal of dead or diseased limbs and trees in accordance with a forest management plan approved by the Massachusetts Department of Conservation of Recreation. Right. And we talked about this last time. Is a permit required for the clearing of trees under an FMP? We decided not to put that as an exemption, so a permit would be required for clearing of trees under an FMP, but that's only if the state allows that. I don't know if a state FMP, I think, John, you said last time that you did not think it, the FMP supersedes any town permits.
Yeah, I'd have to talk to town council about this.
Okay. So we'll leave that to council, because obviously if it does, we don't even have to put it in the exemptions because it is automatically exempt. So, that's.
Through the chair.
Yes.
So do we need to define vegetation here? Because I thought in a previous subsection, you had said something along the lines of trees and undergrowth. There was a term that was used. So I was just curious if understock is something.
Understory.
So, understory, yes. So should we actually say routine maintenance of vegetation, which is not understory? I just want to make sure this doesn't get misused. Plus, does vegetation count towards basal area?
No.
Okay.
Vegetation, yeah, can be a fairly vague term, but technically speaking, we don't even have to include this exemption because dead or diseased limbs and trees are already excluded.
Right.
Okay.
The whole bylaw.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is here simply for clarity, but it is a bit of a,
Duplicate.
yeah. Thanks.
I mean, if there is a conventional accepted definition of vegetation, maybe that's fine. I just wanted to put it out there.
Or we could just say routine maintenance of trees and not have to worry about that, because really this is just about trees. We're really not worrying about other vegetation, shrubbery, or anything like that in this bylaw.
Yep.
Okay. So I would be fine with this being deleted if legal counsel thinks it's not necessary or whatever, because I just think it duplicates. Okay. Removal of dead or diseased limbs or trees necessary to remedy a potential fire or health hazard or threat to public safety is determined by the tree warden. Again, this is essentially covered in hazardous tree definition, but it's here for clarity. I don't see either way. It's just making it very clear. If somebody just looks at the exemptions, then they read through the exemptions. Yeah, it's clear that that's exempt. Construction and maintenance of public and private streets, sidewalks, and utilities within street rights of ways and easements. Good. I like the way you cleaned up this wording, John. Thanks. Okay. Work conducted in accordance with the Scenic Road permit issued by the planning board. Okay. Agricultural activities as specified in Mass General Law 40A3. Okay. And this is a town council comment that either Elaine or John added. Are accessory structures associated with the agriculture included in an exemption? I would say yes. Not from the legal standpoint, but from the intent standpoint. Would you agree from intent of our work here?
I think brewery is an interesting addition there.
Yeah, I don't know about brewery.
The other parts I'm okay with as intent. Brewery doesn't feel like the intent we're talking about to me.
So through the chair, there is a farm brewery designation. And it's
So not a
basically-
commercial brewery, I assume.
Yeah, it's usually small. They grow stuff on site. I think it's actually part of the agricultural section in Mass General Law.
So they're not brewing up IPAs there. It's like,
No, they are. It's just you have a farm brewery, which they can only do a certain amount of barrels. So it's much smaller than like a microbrewery even.
okay.
It's like its own specific definition.
I imagine a similar thing would be a small apple cider thing if you had an apple orchard.
Something similar, yeah.
So does anyone have an objection to us adding to the agricultural line, including accessory structures associated with agriculture? Or would you rather leave this to town council to find out?
I'm torn.
I'm okay with just the first sentence there as it's written.
Okay.
Yeah, me too. I don't think we have to explicitly mention the accessory structures. I would, if it comes to a question, like if planning board is questioned about it, maybe next year we can add a.
All right. Okay. Okay, next exemption. Limited pre-development work related only to creating temporary site access and digging test pits, provided that this work avoids the essential root zone of specimen trees.
Good.
I'd just like to say I love including specimen trees here, and this is a perfect reason to keep that earlier.
Okay. All right. Next, construction of roadways and associated infrastructure for subdivisions approved in accordance with the town's subdivision rules and regs. Okay. Non-commercial tree cutting for fuel for an associated on-site residential use, provided that the aggregate cutting does not exceed the maximum total basal area set forth in this article.
Through the chair, what's the point of this if we have the 1 acre exemption?
This is for residents with 5 acres.
Yeah. They don't have to get a permit.
So the residents that have an existing structure are already exempted in B, is that right?
That's true.
So this would be a resident that doesn't have a single or multifamily home on more than 1 acre. Is there such a thing?
So through the chair, that's no, that's because it says non-commercial tree cutting for fuel for an associated on-site residential use. So this would also be for an existing residential use. I think the first, and I could be wrong. I think in B, it's existing residential uses, and then the construction of single-family uses. So I don't know if this one actually fits.
Yeah,
I might agree with Rachel.
because technically I thought we allowed for clear cutting anytime on a residential property, right? If I have a home there.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, so-
additionally, if the aggregate does not exceed the total maximum basal area, then they wouldn't need it anyway. They
Right.
would need a permit if it exceeds the total basal area. So it's kind of, I mean, going off of what you were saying before, it provides a little bit more clarity, but it is captured in a few others.
I believe it was here before we had the residential use, that it had to be an associated on-site residential use. So it would also have applied to individual lots that no building was on and no building was being built.
Yeah, last time around, actually, I had asked this question and somebody said, if I had an adjoining lot as well, which was its own lot, where I haven't built anything, am I allowed to cut any trees there? And I think in some situations, this one, if the only reason I was cutting trees was for fuel, that would be exempt, not for anything else. So I wouldn't be able to do a clear cutting on my second lot, but if all I'm doing is firewood, I would be able to. I thought that was the explanation provided. But I think somebody also then said, oh, you're better off rezoning them into a single lot or something along those lines. So I wasn't sure where that went.
Oh, yeah.
The residential exemption is for construction, isn't it? Or is it all cutting?
It says all cutting,
Yep.
if there's a home on the lot,
Okay, so I have
or you're
4.7
building a home.
I have 4.7 acres. If I want to go cut firewood on it, I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that would be covered under the exemption B, as Rachel pointed out, this one,
Okay.
Because a house is there.
because the house is there.
But if you own the lot, it's residential and it's 5 acres of land, and you clear cut your lot.
That, unless it's for the purpose of constructing a residential dwelling, that's not allowed.
What if it's in the purpose of constructing a dwelling in 10 years?
I was about to say that. Is there anything where we can say you've gotten approval for the house? Like, again, I don't want to get in the way of someone using their land to build a house for themselves. I don't want them cutting their trees and saying, I think 10 years from now, I'm going to build a house. So I'm going to cut the trees now.
John? So for single family construction, what approvals do they need to get?
That's part of my question too.
I mean, it could be as simple as an A&R.
Yeah. Can people do things without an A&R? Like just a building permit?
I guess in what situation? If there's an existing house on the lot,
No.
no, they couldn't.
No, land that's been in the family for a long time. And maybe I think that there's some wetlands on it. So I'm just going to cut all these trees, dry out the land, and basically someday I'm going to have a house there because it'll, the botany will have changed.
Well, if it's a wetland, Concom won't let them do that.
But so let's just back up a minute. Let's just say, okay, there's a lot, it's wooded, it's owned by me, and there's no building on it. Right. If I'm constructing a house, what do I need to do? Yeah.
So I think the thing we kind of need to go back to how these things are enforced. If somebody has a lot that's in the middle of the woods and they clear it, there's really no way for anyone to know that it's being done unless somebody reports it. So if somebody were to clear a lot that they, for 10 years down the road, want to put a house on and no one reports it being cleared, there's no real way that we can enforce the bylaw. I don't think that's a secret. Right. So if somebody reports it, then you say, well, why are you clearing this? And they say, well, I want to build a house. Okay, well, where's your intent to show that you have a purpose to build this house? Is it an A&R? Is it a building permit? Is it really anything? And if they don't have that, then this bylaw would be enforced that way.
Okay, so it could be a building permit or an A&R? Or
I would say, it says for the purposes of constructing a single family lot, I think they need to show the purpose in effect. They need to show some way that they're saying, yeah, this is why we're doing it. I don't know if I would include that because
How else can they show it?
I mean, I'm just wondering at what point do they need a building permit? They could clear the lot without a building permit, but they can't build yet. So they could say, you know, I'm just trying to figure out what the purpose, how to prove the purpose.
Yeah.
Of the enforcement.
Or maybe if we leave the language as for the purposes of constructing with proof. So the proof, we don't know what could be the proof. So a planning board can ask different proof. It could be A&R, it could be whatever is at that point. They have to show some proof that they were intending to do this, right? So if they have a...
Without defining what proof is, it kind of puts the planning board in a tough spot to determine what the proof is.
But you're suggesting if we don't list a proof, it's still understood, John?
It's more ambiguous, and it wouldn't be the planning board making this determination. And maybe that goes back to Madhu's comment. It's the zoning enforcement officer or the tree warden, because those in the bylaw, that's who would be authorized to enforce it, along with the planning board, but they're not going to actually do the on-the-ground enforcement. Yeah, it's tough to figure out how to establish purpose in this case.
And we're out of meetings. But
I'm going to let you ruminate about that, because I do think, you know, maybe we can say per the Director of Municipal Inspections or whatever.
Through the chair, hey, Mary, can I just propose that we take out the purposes of constructing a single family or two-family residential dwelling? I mean, I think the purpose of this is to protect the trees. And if we're going to have an exemption for a residential dwelling that may be built, I'm not sure that that's helping with the purpose of the bylaw.
That changes a whole lot if we delete that.
Right.
Because we've been talking about a residential, I'm just trying to think through this. So otherwise it would be only existing homes. And anybody who owned a lot that wanted to build on it would have to go through this process. And we were trying to exempt them.
And I'd like to continue to exempt them. I just don't want them to cut trees with a vague notion of a house later on.
I agree. And that's why I think it needs to stay in, but we need to find some way to say, you know, show your purpose for, you know, show that you have a real intent.
I think I'm just affirming we're on the same page.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Can you just specify an approved construction of a single family, or does that encompass an A&R and a building permit?
I think, Curtis, that's what John's saying is the tricky part. What does approved mean?
Okay.
And that might require more rumination.
So one thing I'm thinking, and I don't know if this clears it up, but it may add a little bit more teeth to it. If we say for the established purpose of constructing a single family or two-family residential dwelling, because then it kind of puts a foot down of saying, well, you need to actually establish this purpose, and how that's determined is a little bit vague, but at least it gives some type of evidence. Whether it's a permit, they've got plans drawn up from an architect. They've got some proof showing that they actually do intend on building a house and they're not just cutting trees down.
And Gary Trendle's still on the call, so he can think on it too before the planning board makes final decisions.
Are you okay with me changing that to an individual building lot? It just makes more sense to me rather than having it in plural.
Yeah, that definitely makes more sense.
Thanks. All right, so we're leaving this. This is not going to be in here, but it's just kind of a reminder to John to, you know, if you think of anything else or you want to discuss it with town council, when we're at that next step, that would be great. But
I can also talk to the zoning enforcement official and just see how they would want to have it worded so that they could enforce it.
okay, that would be great. So we're going to be voting on this with this condition that, you know, that's something that John is doing after the fact. Okay. Okay. Let's see, where were we? Agriculture, limited development work, non-commercial tree cutting for fuel for an associated on-site residential use. So if we're having it for an associated on-site residential use, the exemption is not necessary, right?
Well, Mary, I think the key here is that the tree cutting for fuel is, we're not clear cutting that lot to send that off to somebody else. It's for on-site use.
Yeah.
And if you just change that comma to a period and don't put the rest of that in there, we're saying if you own a lot and you're clearing trees for your own on-site fuel consumption, that's exempt.
To the chair, how would we establish intent that you're tree cutting for fuel, given that we don't seem to be able to know exactly how to do that for building a residential house? Like how would you determine someone is doing it for fuel?
Again, it would be to a certain extent just by honor.
Well, Mary, I think there's also, I mean, if we see tractor trailers pulling up to the lot and loading the wood on to haul it away, that's not on-site fuel consumption. If they're cutting it down and stacking it up in their backyard and it goes away,
yeah,
you know, I think it's, I'd like to just apply a little bit of common sense.
Yep.
Right, and through the chair, I think it also makes sense for us to be a little bit, in the sense, this has to pass in town meeting. So if you put too many conditions even around this, that's going to get challenged too. So I don't want people coming and saying, what, you're going to not trust my judgment on this because that's what I do, meaning cut trees for fuel. So I'd like to keep it at that level rather than mistrust people in that sense. This is, after all, about personal property rights at that point.
So do we want to change this in any way or leave it?
I like it the way it is, and I like keeping in the does not exceed the maximum total area.
Okay. I think it's the maximum percent of total basal area. I think that's the, well, anyhow.
But one thing I want to ask, so over the course of time, I'm going to exceed this. If I never build anything on this, every year I cut some trees, 10 years down the line, I would have exceeded the maximum total basal area.
Unless you're growing more trees.
Assuming you let the trees grow back, then you won't.
Yeah.
Agreed, but that's not a requirement.
I think it should be a requirement. That's why I want to keep it in.
The percentage of the total basal area is what you want to keep in, right?
I do, yes, because if you want to cut it down for fuel, fine. You shouldn't need to chop down 20% of your woods at any time for your own personal.
No, you are absolutely right, but then you are
on a little bit at a time. The old ones should be allowed to fill back in.
Okay, so that's my question. Are we creating a requirement, Ted, or to ensure that the owner makes efforts to regrow some trees or plant new trees, essentially?
I don't even know if it needs to be an effort. If you let nature run its course and you're taking a reasonable amount of wood, you should be fine.
Okay.
So I don't even know that it needs effort to replant.
Okay.
Mary, through the chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
The use of the word aggregate there, if I'm taking 5% out each year for 5 years, I've exceeded the 20%. And is that what we're trying to do here?
So through the chair, I've got, if I can remember them, 3 comments. So if it's okay.
Yeah, please.
All right. I disagree with the percent of the,
Okay.
keep putting in the percent of, because total basal area used elsewhere, while that is a limit to the maximum basal area, total basal area is also, I think, a correct term, because you are looking at you're really converting the 20% to what it is on that site for a total basal area, right? So the total basal area is site specific. The percentage is a district specific thing. Because 20%
Basal area is what is there.
right.
We're not saying that they're cutting can't exceed everything that's there. We're saying it cannot exceed the percentages set forward in that.
Right. I see what you're saying. I still don't think the percent of should be in there. I think it just should be reworded to say does not exceed
Portion of? I don't know.
the total, yeah, basically I want to say the cutting of maximum cutting allowed, something like that, something reworded like that. I can reword it to
Okay.
be better.
And it's in
other-
two places. It's just in applicability and in here.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's any other place that I noticed it.
Okay. But to Ted's point, and going off of Sundar's question, the basal area is, as a forest management technique, is intended to preserve the larger trees, which then self-plant to encourage growth of those same types of trees. So I think if it's done properly, and I think that's the caveat, if it's done properly over 10 years or so, you should then get those new trees from the existing stock of trees to replant and replenish the forest. Obviously, if they do it all quickly, that might not happen. And then the last point was the aggregate in this way, and I can understand how it was read by Ron, but the intent was the aggregate, you're taking one tree for fuel at one point in time, then you're taking another tree. You're not doing it all at once. So the aggregate of the cutting of those individual trees for fuel does not exceed the allowed cutting, not year over year, because it really, you would want to do a new estimate every year, theoretically, to say this is the new total basal area, so now I can cut 20% of that.
So if I understand your point, John, it's I could cut up to 20% each year.
Essentially, yeah. And we don't set the year as a timeline, but the intent was for fuel cutting, you might not be cutting all the trees at once. You might be, cutting one tree 1 week and then, now I need more fuel, so now I'm going to cut this other one. And spreading it out over a season or so. That's the intent. Whether that's that's how it comes across, clearly not, because it was interpreted a different way.
So should we put in over a year, over a 2-year period, something like that?
Yeah, so that's up to Zach.
Yeah. Thoughts?
I think putting some time limit on there, an annual basis might not be a bad idea. Because each year you're going to look at it and say, I can't cut more than 20% of my available trees.
So my pushback on an annual basis is that's not enough time for the forest to replenish itself.
Mm-hmm.
And in no time, in 5 years, there's not going to be any trees left.
So through the chair, I'm still confused about the on-site residential use term being used here. I thought B already would have exempted that. So why is the term on-site residential use still here? I mean, I thought this was all about if I have an adjoining lot where my home doesn't live there, then I cut it, right? Because on my own lot, we just established that I can pretty much cut everything with no restrictions. B.
That is when there's an existing house on the property, Sundar. This is residential zone. Looking forward without the house already there.
True, Ria, then we should not be calling it on-site residential use. On-site by definition means we're living right there.
So through the chair,
Yeah.
2 comments on that. One to Ted, because his was, I think, kind of skipped over. I don't think that's necessarily true that you'll have no trees left over, because if you start the analysis year after year, you're going to have 20% of that year. So you're never going to, it's going to be diminishing that 20%, what the basal area actually is. But you're going to come to a point where if you cut one tree down, that's going to exceed your 20%. And then you really can't cut anything else.
I realized that right after I said it. Nonetheless, I still think 1 year is a pretty short time.
And then to Sundar's point, I think the focus is really the non-commercial tree cutting, not the residential use. That the non-commercial tree cutting for fuel is for the residential use. So that if you have a residential use on the site and you're cutting down trees, but then selling them to somebody else, that would be a violation.
Why don't we just cut out the for and associated on-site residential use? Anybody have a problem with that?
But I'm sorry, John, I just want to counter what you just said. If I have a 5-acre lot, I am permitted to clear cut my trees. Why would I not be able to sell it to some? I mean, is that what you're saying, that I actually can't make any money out of that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Because that's commercial use.
Wouldn't be exempted. You would have to get a permit if you wanted to do that.
Through the chair, if you were to cut trees for fuel and it's not associated with on-site residential use, what would you do with it?
It would be for a residential use that is elsewhere. My house is elsewhere than the lot on which I'm cutting. That's the only reason that this wouldn't already be exempt from Part B. So if you take out the associated on-site residential use, it just makes it non-commercial tree cutting for fuel. So anybody anywhere who isn't already exempt, you still can't cut it for fuel without a permit for commercial use.
Can you take out just the on-site? So if you had 5 acres across town, you wanted to cut wood on, it's still for my personal residential use, but it's not on the same side as where the wood's being cut.
Okay. I don't think it would be associated, but I think for residential use.
So I'm trying to think of an example, Mary. So if I have a hotel, let's say, with a big fireplace and I own land, I could cut as many trees as I wanted to burn in the fireplace of my hotel. Is that what we're saying?
Well, this actually was talking about residential use, and the hotel might not be considered residential use, but essentially that's what it's talking about. Or how about this? You have a house in Maine, but you're cutting some wood in Hopkinton and you're gonna haul it to your house in Maine. Okay, it's still for residential use. You're not selling it, so it's non-commercial, but it's not for an on-site residential use. So that's why I'm saying, let's delete that part.
I'm okay with having it or not having it. I'm okay with either.
Okay. Is everyone happy with the way it's worded right now?
Yes.
Okay, we're talking about annual being too short. You want to make it 2 years or something
I
else?
prefer 2 years. I'd like just a little bit more tree protection. I prefer 2 years. And I think I get 2 votes, is what I learned earlier.
Okay, and John is going to work on this, the total basal area and how we refer to it appropriately. Okay. Oh, okay. I missed the trails one. Okay, construction, maintenance, and pre-development work for trails in accordance with the town or state trails project. Yeah? Okay. review standards. So perhaps I was wrong, but I think this is where we're going to have the most discussion tonight. So cutting and clearing of trees shall be limited to a maximum percentage of the existing total basal area, that's in square feet per acre, of the subject site as follows. These percentages are not set in stone. These are our decision, okay? And that's what we were discussing. Residential and agriculture, business and industrial zones, okay? The reason I put this ballpark in a few drafts ago, residential and agriculture at 20%. Again, keeping in mind, individual building lots are exempt. OSLPDs are exempt. But other subdivisions are not exempt. Okay. Agriculture, in the agricultural zoning district, agricultural uses are exempt, but other uses are not exempt. The reason I set it so low as our ballpark for discussion was because of the recent solar developments that have clear cut and put solar on approximately 30% of the available subject site. And that happened on numerous occasions, but we still considered it a fairly large clear cutting. Okay? So it doesn't mean that developers cannot develop more land than that or clear more land than that for the development. It means that they do have to pay attention. And the way that this whole article has been worded, they're going to pay more attention to the bigger trees and perhaps design things around saving a bigger tree or two or three. But also that they can cut more than that if the planning board allows it, as long as they plant new trees to offset what they've cut. Okay? Now, business and industrial, I put it a much larger percentage because I don't necessarily, and this is again, it's me, I don't expect that with the parking lot and a building for a commercial or an industrial use, they will have to clear substantial portions of the lot, accepting, of course, the setbacks, the setbacks which are already in our zoning. And in the setbacks, they will be maintaining the existing trees, because that's, again, how we've written this article and how much of the planning board and existing zoning bylaws are worded for the setbacks. And if they are unable to maintain the setbacks, they are required to plant trees to replace what they've cut down. Okay, so we are not trying to stop business and industrial development. So that's what we need to verify here, is that we're not imposing so much of a restriction on business and industrial that it drives business away. Okay, that's where these came from. Now, open it up to suggestions.
Mary, I would just like to suggest that the 20% for residential and agricultural, while we're not putting life sciences buildings in there, there are commercial developers that might want to put a 5 or 10 house subdivision in some place. And given the fact that we've got a 25% maximum lot coverage anyway, and this restriction on top of it, we might effectively be stopping all future development, and maybe that's your intention. But I thought the purpose of this was to stop large scale commercial solar from clear cutting. And I'm just questioning that number. It just seems like an arbitrary number. I don't know how to judge whether that's a good number or a bad number.
I'm not quite sure either.
I think that we're not necessarily discouraging neighborhood developments, but we actually would like to encourage it to be environmentally friendly through the, and I'm going to get the acronym wrong, OSLPD. And I think that,
Yep.
I think that that would be a good offshoot of a tree protection bylaw, is it's one more incentive to develop open space preservation developments. And I think, I don't know if 20% is right or not. And I'll just repeat what Mary said. We arrived at that because we've seen what 30% looks like when it comes to massive clearing of trees for commercial development, and it's ugly.
Mm-hmm.
So we picked a number lower. I don't know for sure. 20 might still be too big. But that's where it came from. I think a question I really don't have the answer to is the 72 restrictive in those zones for business development? When I think of those areas, I don't know, for example, if we looked at Mr. Mastriani's new proposed storage facility, does anyone know what percentage of trees are being cleared on that lot? I don't at all. Does anyone have a guess? Would that have been forbidden with a 70% cap?
Nothing is technically forbidden.
Okay, but you know what I mean. Would that?
Yeah, I do know what you mean, but nothing is technically forbidden. Every development, industrial development or otherwise, does plant some trees, some new trees.
Right.
So everyone is replacing some things. It's just a matter of whether or not this allows for enough of a leeway. So we have a comment from Gary Trendle. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, so just a couple of thoughts. And, you know, to Ted's question and the discussion about what is the right number, I mean, I think we can look at the OSLPD as some guidelines, because in that situation, you know, there are, you know, there is a maximum number of land that needs to be undisturbed. So I think that's probably a really good starting point. I think the other thing that I'm just curious to get reaction to, and I don't know quite where it fits, but you know, one of the things that we've done with the OSLPD is that, you know, in exchange for encouraging some good, what we consider to be good design practices, you know, we sweeten the pot a little bit for the developers or the home builders, and we ease some restrictions elsewhere. And so that's kind of as a compromise to say, look, we want to encourage you to protect larger tracts of land. And in exchange for that, we're willing to let you, you know, use, require, or we're willing to allow for, you know, less frontage and smaller lots, and, you know, in some cases, longer cul-de-sacs and all these other things. But I guess I'm just wondering if there's a way to do something like that here, where while we have these more restrictive, you know, requirements, that maybe there's some other way that we can ease restrictions so that we can ensure that land is being used the appropriate way. And it might be too complicated to solve tonight. I'm just kind of throwing that out there as a way to kind of reach a compromise, so that this doesn't end up just stymieing all development in town, but actually, you know, encourages the kind of development that we are more supportive of.
So some of the things that are written into some other bylaws that allow some planning board discretion. I was just looking at some of these other criteria for the reviews. Reasonable effort shall be demonstrated in the development plan for preservation of, you know, and we give some specific things. We can potentially say things like planning board has discretion to to adjust the amount of replanting and percent basal area. I guess it would be a waiver, a certain waiver for a certain amount based on the development plan's willingness to preserve specimen trees or something along those lines. That's just suggestion for thought as we're going through this. So, does anyone have a suggestion of a different percentage amount before we go to finalize this for planning board? Now, planning board does have the opportunity to, after they take public comment, they may change any and all wording in this bylaw, but we'd like to give them as good a start as possible. So, I'm sorry, Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, through the chair. Is there any way that we could, I guess I'm just trying to get some perspective for what this means. And I'm wondering if even there is some way to either have this calculated, like if we look at some, previous projects that have gone through as to what percentage of total basal area they would be clearing there. I feel like we need some point of perspective here, because this isn't just disturbed land, it's basal area, which complicates things. And I realize that there's costs associated with doing that, but I don't know how, unless there's some other standard that we can reference, or, other towns or municipalities have used this type of guidelines. I think that it's really hard. And I'm should probably be asking this question of myself, but I'm wondering, I'm curious to get John's thoughts, if there's any way that we could even have total basal area calculated on, a semi-recent project to give us some perspective.
So through the chair, I think that's going to be mostly impossible, only because unless a basal area survey was done on the project before the trees were cut down, we'll have no idea what the basal area was. What we could do is do hypotheticals and say, here is, an imaginary acre of land. There's this distribution of DBH trees, which equals this much basal area. A reduction of 20% would mean you could cut down, for example, this many trees of these DBH. And then do another example where the trees are smaller or larger to say, okay, you might be cutting down more trees in terms of number, but the basal area is smaller because they were smaller trees and you're leaving up the larger trees. I think that's really the only way, unless we get a basal area survey on a site that's been developed, which, I mean, they don't have a requirement to do that. So I don't know
or the other option is we just do that basal area calculation on some existing parcel of land that hasn't been cleared to give us some idea of, percentage of the total acreage that could be cleared. Because I think that's a more meaningful term. Like I can get my arms around, like I know what 50% of the land cleared means. And I mean, we could do that for, any one of town owned land. We could just go out and do that basal survey and see what it comes back with. I don't know.
So we could, I think, through the chair, we would need to hire an arborist or a forester or somebody to do that survey.
I think that estimates can be done based on what I've read in these articles, and that we could relatively easily do some estimates. I mean, I'm not saying that they're going to be like the certified version.
The penny with a string thing.
Yeah,
I think you could do some rough estimates. That
I'm willing to do it on my lot before the next planning board meeting.
I didn't know how accurate that was.
Back half of my lot is completely wooded, never been cleared. I mean, in recent, 100 years. And the front of the lot has been cleared. So I will do it on the back of the lot. I can take pictures to show examples. And I will do it several different times and have my husband do it so we can get different estimates, as you know, see how much they vary using the penny method and so on. Okay, so I will do that. It doesn't help us for the vote tonight, but it will help planning board get some perspective on this. And anyone else who wants to try that, please do.
Through the chair, if I can just add though, I think that to your point, it's not going to help tonight, and it may not even help before the planning board hearing. But if this moves forward to town meeting, we've got to have some credibility for these numbers. And if that means that we've got to go out and hire a consultant to give us some, even if it's some guidance or something, I think we have to do that, because there's no way that it's going to be hard enough to get through planning board. There's no way this is going to get through town meeting if these numbers are just kind of arbitrarily chosen without a little bit more basis for what they are.
Yeah, I think we're beyond a little bit beyond completely arbitrary because of the research that we've done thus far. But I hear you.
Sorry.
I hear your point, and I just don't want everybody to feel completely demoralized from that.
Yeah, sorry. I just given the uncertainty in this group that knows this topic better than anybody.
Yeah.
I think that just the more expert testimonial or examples or something we have is going to be really important.
Okay. Ron.
Mary, just a point of clarification. Earlier, Mr. Barker Hook said we know what the percentages were with the solar developments that were out there, but those were all percentages of acres cleared. They had nothing to do with basal cells. So I still don't feel like we have any point of reference here.
Yeah, and that's a very good point I thought of while we were discussing this too. So really good point. Really good point.
And I can see that point as well. And I think that's what Gary was bringing up.
Yep.
When we picked these numbers, we were thinking of area cleared. I am with you completely on that, Ron. And I think we just have to leave it to the planning board because frankly, we're out of time.
Mm-hmm.
I myself am comfortable voting on these numbers, knowing that they're still going to be looked at more carefully and that we're not proposing the final thing.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. And I think that that's the way we would have to look at this. And I understand if anyone needs to abstain because they don't feel comfortable for that. But keeping in mind that we simply vote on a recommendation to take this to town meeting. We recommend things to the planning board. Planning board votes to decide whether or not to place it on town meeting, and they have complete jurisdiction over any wording changes as well. Okay. Just quickly to go through some of the other review standards we have. We talked about them last time a little bit. Any tree planted to mitigate the cutting of trees in excess of the maximum total basal area shall be a native non-invasive species. Survival of these trees shall be guaranteed by the applicant for 18 months from the date of planting.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that.
And yes, it's difficult to guarantee it, but nonetheless, this gives teeth if there was a subdivision review by Beta, for instance, and they notice a dead tree, then that is one way that it can be addressed. But at the same time, I also know that most of the developers who, if they planted a tree and it's dead, they're going to want to replace it. So, but nonetheless, you're right. It might be a little difficult to enforce, but at least it's there. Okay. Site and building design shall preserve natural topography outside the cleared area to reduce unnecessary land disturbance, preserve natural drainage. Appropriate native vegetation shall be planted in disturbed areas to enhance or restore wildlife habitat. Reasonable effort shall be demonstrated in the development plan for the preservation of specimen trees, existing stands of trees, trees at site perimeter and forested area that is contiguous with vegetation on adjacent sites so that larger undisturbed woodlands remain and habitat is not fragmented. Understory vegetation shall be preserved beneath the drip line of preserved trees. And clearing for excavation shall be limited to the minimum area necessary to maneuver a backhoe or other construction equipment. Roots shall be root pruned rather than pulled or ripped out during excavation. Tunneling for installation shall be used wherever feasible to protect root systems of trees. I'll pause for any comments. I think we reviewed this fairly extensively last time, and John thankfully cleaned up the wording. It's usually by the end of these meetings, I can't word anything to save my life.
Chair,
Yes.
we still, and we're at 9 o'clock, I'm aware, we still didn't deal with replacing trees and basal area. And is that when they're freshly planted? Or is that 2 years after they're planted that you've gotten back to whatever percentages are decided? Am I making sense? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep. The
Something
planning board may allow for clearing of trees in excess of the maximum set forth above if the applicant commits to the planting of new trees on the subject site or off-site in a location acceptable to the planning board. And
Right.
then the net total of tree clearing after completion of the approved work shall be equal to or less than the maximum total basal area. So the net total is what we're referring to. How are we going to determine that net total? Or do we want to leave this to the discretion of the planning board?
Right. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's our job to try to help the planning board as much as we can. It's
Yeah,
also-
but I mean, on a case by case basis, we could leave it for the planning board for each permit
That's
to
true.
determine whether or not, that's
The
what I'm
part that
saying.
I'm reminding us of is basal area when the trees are replanted or 2 years after the trees are replanted. Do we give the developer a window of saying within 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, you've got to get back to that 20%, which then allows the trees to grow? That's what I'm raising.
One unintended consequence of that could be, I'm just going to put fast growing trees in there. So we get that, we get a lot of growth in it. Those aren't really the best trees for I mean,
Yeah, good point.
there's so many variables.
I agree. And that's why I don't know the answer to my question. I'm not even proposing an answer. But it seems to me the basal tree area begs that question. At what point do you have to get back to the percentage? When are we measuring the fresh basal tree area? And I don't have an answer or a proposal. Just raising the question again.
So we could simply say that the plan for replanting of trees is acceptable to the planning board and not make it a net total.
I agree. It has to be a little vague because we can't go that level of specific in the bylaw.
I think the enforcement of it becomes a little problematic, even if we knew exactly how to do it, whether it's 2 years later or not. I think the enforcement becomes difficult.
Do you have a requirement that the developer's arborist address what this is going to look like over, I don't know how you quantify that, but a landscape architect or an arborist that knew what they were doing would be able to say, okay, everything we're proposing in 5 years is going to have a basal area of this that offsets.
This is,
Developer shall
here we
submit a
go.
report.
So a survey of existing trees, plan with all disturbances and location, showing the location. Do we have the landscape? Where's the landscape plan? Nope. So maybe
So through the chair, since you're in this section, one of the comments that Elaine made, and I think it's a good one, is deleting those plan details, having the planning board establish a set of submission requirements separate from the bylaw, and they can go into detail about what needs to be included, likely including all of this, but maybe including another type of plan. That
Okay.
way, if things change in the future, they don't have to amend the bylaw to change the submission information.
Okay. So this basically being removed and put in a separate regulation, whatever you call it. Is
Yes,
that what you're talking about?
yes.
So
And then, yes.
that would be, that would be shall first obtain written authorization by filing a request for such work. I
So
mean,
you
I
would
like the
delete that
wording
first
of
paragraph.
this. I like this wording here on top in A. And then just say the planning board shall adopt submission requirements and fees following the public hearing. So,
I think you can take off that last sentence of the first paragraph. Oh, wait, never mind.
all of it?
No. To the comma.
Okay.
Actually, so the shall first obtain the written authorization of the planning board, period, then delete the rest, and then include the paragraph that you've left below.
Got it. Okay. That works for me. But I also think that this section that we're putting into a separate document, which I think we should do right away, into a separate document for the planning board, it needs to include a landscape plan. I thought it had that. The plan shall accompany and show location of the trees, removal. So it should include the plan should include the replanting, okay? Replanting plan. There's some wording in one of the other bylaws that that had that, and I thought we had it at one point, but I probably deleted it. Okay. You good, John? Okay. Okay, so where were we? We were near the end here. This is about enforcement. We haven't discussed it a great deal, but I think, again, this is something that John can review with the Director of Municipal Inspections and was reviewing that one other section as well, but to determine how best to enforce this. I do like the non-criminal disposition penalty shall be a fine of not more than $300 for each citation for any violation, and shall be required to restore any damage. Removal of each individual tree shall be considered a separate violation. I think that, again, at least makes people pay attention to it. So thoughts on that? Seem reasonable? Obviously, the exact amount would be at the discretion of the enforcement official.
Mary, where does that money go?
Buy some trees.
Well, I'm sincerely, Wellesley, and again, we're out of time. Wellesley has what they call a tree bank. And so the money goes somehow to replanting trees. I don't know what their mechanism is, but I'm curious for us, where does that money go?
I do not know.
Okay.
John, do you know?
It goes back to the town, but in what account, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so is there anything left that we needed to review? I think we were good there. Decision. Oh, would this part be also part of the regulations?
No, that would stay in the bylaw.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I love undo. Applicability, you're going to be checking the right wording, percent of total basal area. Okay. Okay, and we did not delete any of the definitions. So do we still want to leave 12 inches or less a year as a definition of slow growing, or should just leave it vague?
It sounded to me like slow growing is an understood term by arborists, and we don't need to spell it out. That's what I understood from Curtis. Or maybe John, or maybe both.
Okay, that sounds good to me. It makes sense.
I think what I Googled came from a commercial site that was just specifying these are how we classify them.
Okay.
So it wasn't from an arborist society or anything.
So is there any other comments that any of you have from your review of this draft over the weekend that we have not already covered?
We decided that the tree warden was well-defined enough. We didn't need to worry about.
Yep, it's town official.
Okay. Yep.
And Mary, through the chair, can you specify when we go to vote what we are voting on and what we are not voting on?
Yes.
Because there was those entire sections that we had talked about last time related to the applicant and what they need to provide that doesn't seem to be here now, or that's being put in a separate regulation.
Yep. I will make it clear. Anyone else? Okay. So we are voting on the tree protection bylaw, a recommendation to the planning board to take this to town meeting after the appropriate public hearing at the planning board level. And it will include these corrections that we made while we were reviewing today. Okay, I'm just scrolling through very quickly. This item in highlighting is something that John was going to wordsmith. I can't highlight that. I'm sorry. It has to do with the conversion from PDF to Word. So, okay. The procedure for obtaining permits, we are going to put all of the actual application requirements and the fees into a separate document that planning board will adopt separately. And that can, we are actually providing them this wording that has been deleted right here. And this is the same wording that we reviewed at the last meeting, with the addition of including a replanting plan from a landscape architect or certified arborist.
So to the chair, point of clarification. So are we going to vote on those requirements separately to send to the planning board, or by voting on this bylaw, are we saying that we're going to send both to the planning board?
We will
with
send
our recommendation.
planning board. Technically speaking, even though the vote is just for the bylaw, the separate part that we're sending to the planning board is simply draft wording for a potential for them to adopt submission requirements. So it's our recommendation for submission requirements, but it's not the bylaw that we're voting on to send to town meeting. So it's really not part of, we're you could say that John is sending this to them as the draft, of the submission requirements. But it really is not part of what the bylaw we're voting on, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. The exemptions that we discussed. John is going to work on the wording here to make sure it's a clear purpose for construction. And then the percentages we are sending as is, but with the expected public comment and additional discussion at planning board. And I invite and encourage all of you to attend the planning board meeting and help explain it as necessary. Okay, so, and then we had no other changes beyond that. Okay. So I invite a motion to recommend the providing this tree clearing bylaw draft to the planning board and recommend it for town meeting this year.
So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you. We'll do a roll call vote. Rhea,
Aye.
Curtis,
Aye.
Ted,
Aye.
Rachel,
Aye.
Ron,
No?
Madhu,
Aye.
Sundar,
Aye.
and Mary Larson Marlowe is aye. So it passes, what is it, 7-1? I lost count. All right. Thank you very much. Quickly, I would like to entertain a motion to approve minutes from our January 24th meeting. Is that one of them?
February 1st and February 17th.
Okay, February 1st and February 17th. We have to do them separately?
You don't have to, but
Okay.
we usually do.
I'd like to entertain a motion to approve both sets of minutes, February 1st and February 17th.
Motion. I'll make a motion.
And second,
Second.
roll call vote. Rachel,
Yes.
Madhu,
Yes.
Sundar,
Aye. Yes.
Ron,
Yes?
Rhea,
Yes.
Curtis,
Yes.
Ted,
Aye.
and Mary Larson Marlowe is an aye. So it passes. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
thank you. Roll call vote. Ron,
Yes?
Curtis,
Yes.
Ted,
Aye.
Sundar,
Aye.
Rachel,
Yes.
Rhea,
Aye.
Madhu,
Yes.
and Mary is a yes. Thank you all for the really hard work on this. I appreciate it.